Well, good morning, everyone. We are in Exodus chapter 12, beginning at verse 31 today. Lord willing, we'll also tackle chapter 13 and kind of call a conclusion to our first packet. I have the second one behind me in case I forget to mention that later. You can grab one of those, or they'll certainly be here next time. If you're watching this online, you can just find them in the podium after church on Sunday too. So, where are we? We have the plague of the firstborn, or the Passover. We're still going to talk a little bit about those regulations yet today. And yeah, God's watch over the people. So, good lesson. Let's begin with a reading. Wayne's going to start us off. We got chapter 12, 31 to 51.
Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron that night and said, "Get up, get away from my people. Both you and the Israelites, go, serve the Lord as you have said. Take also your flocks and your herds as you have said, and go. But also bless me." The Egyptians urged the people to leave the land quickly, for the Egyptians said, "We're all going to die." The Israelites took their dough before it was leavened. They carried their kneading bowls, which were wrapped in their clothing, on their shoulders. The Israelites did just as Moses had said, and they asked the Egyptians for articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing. The Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they let the Israelites have what they asked for. In this way they plundered the Egyptians. The Israelites set out from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides their families. A mixed group of non-Israelites also went up along with them, as well as a large amount of livestock, both flocks and herds. The Israelites baked the dough which they had brought out of Egypt into unleavened loaves, for it had not been leavened, because they had been driven out of Egypt and could not delay. They also had not prepared any provisions for themselves. The amount of time the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, to the very day, all of the Lord's divisions went out from the land of Egypt. It was a night that the Lord kept vigil to bring them out of the land of Egypt. This same night is dedicated to the Lord. All the Israelites are to keep vigil throughout their generations. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "This is the regulation concerning the Passover. No foreigner may eat it, but any slave whom you have purchased may eat it if you circumcise him. A temporary resident or a hired servant may not eat it. It must be eaten inside one house. You are not to carry any of the meat outside of the house. Do not break any of its bones. The whole community of Israel shall do this. If a resident alien among you wants to observe the Passover to the Lord, every male in his household must be circumcised. Then he may take part in it. He will be treated like a native born of the land, but no uncircumcised person may eat it. The same law will apply to the native born and to the alien who resides among you." So that is what all the Israelites did. They did just as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron. That same day, the Lord brought the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, lined up by their divisions.
All right. So, yeah, I heard you had a, yeah, thank you, Wayne. By divisions, I don't know if that was a note in our lesson or if I read that, but yeah, they seem to be thinking we're going to leave Egypt and we're going to go out and fight our way through. And we'll see this in a moment, that God says, no, you're not going to go the route of the sea. You're not going to take the main highway to the promised land through the Philistines and everything. But they seem to be ready to do that. So I suppose, in the past, that desert was kind of like their Alcatraz. I mean, what are we going to do? We're going to jump in the water and swim over to San Francisco and be free? Are we going to go out into the desert and well, if we get through the desert, what are we going to find? We're going to find a bunch of people wanting not to let us pass. But now with Moses, they seem to have the courage and the thought that, yeah, we're gonna leave. We're gonna be ready for battle, whatever it takes. And then, of course, their plans are not God's plans. But we will get there in a moment. So let's talk about our lesson here a bit more. In the look section, it said verse 40. The number 430 years is the exact length of the Israel's stay in Egypt. You can see Genesis 15:13, where God used the round number 400 when he foretold Israel's stay in a foreign land. Now, Galatians 3:17 states that the law introduced 430 years later does not set aside the covenant previously established by God. So Paul is simply saying that the law was introduced 430 years after God gave the promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The 430-year mark forms a convenient end date for the time period. Actually, God had been giving these promises for more than 200 years before Jacob entered Egypt. So suffice to say, sometimes we speak exactly, sometimes we're speaking a little bit more round numbers, but yet it's all in the ballpark, right? It's God had his Israelites there 430 years. So, discuss. It is a general principle that greater people bless lesser people. What was Pharaoh acknowledging in verse 32? Guess what did he do in verse 32?
He asked them to bless him also.
All right.
He also told them they could go.
Yeah, he told him to get out of there.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, what does Pharaoh think is happening versus what is actually happening?
I think, doesn't he think that they're leaving and then they're gonna come back? They're just gonna go out a little ways and do their worshiping that they had said, and then they'll come back and keep serving us.
Yeah.
Surprise.
It does feel like that, right? And that has been the request up until now. Let my people go worship in the desert. But now he's assuming something, right? Because Moses and the Israelites turn around and they start, well, I guess that leads to the second question. The Israelites were robbing the Egyptians by taking their wealth. Well, Moses and the Israelites are on a different page. Right? They're certainly going to go worship the Lord in the wilderness. But, I mean, if they're marching out in divisions, if they're taking clothes with them from the Egyptians and gold and silver, they're not planning on coming back. And because, what are they going to do with gold and silver out in the wilderness? And then just bring it back? That doesn't make much sense. So it seems like Pharaoh is kind of in a little bit of denial here. Like he knows he needs to let them go, but I don't know. He's definitely been a confused man to begin with. So interestingly enough, yeah, he says go, and then we can talk a bit about in a minute or next week about how long it takes him to take his army after them. Because I've dug into that a little bit. That's a little tricky too. But at any rate, yes, he has kind of been implying they're coming back. You're doing this worship. So maybe I'll do question 2 and then circle your questions if you have some. So were the Israelites robbing the Egyptians by taking their wealth? Sharon?
I mean, you can look at it different ways, but actually that was prophesied also back in Genesis 15:14 to Abraham. He announces, it's gonna be 400 years, I'll punish the nation, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. So it was God's plan all along that they have these possessions from the Egyptians to take out. And God's detailed things, a lot of those are materials that will later probably become part of the construction of the tabernacles, things that they would need, for that, gold or silver, different things like that.
Yeah. That's what always gets me a little bit about, like, if you play out the Civil War thing, how would you divide the dollar? The South had the Continental, that didn't work out for them very well. Yeah, how would they be a new nation without any money? Really, really kind of hard. A couple other thoughts. Joan?
Since the Israelites were slaves, we could call that back wages.
Yeah, that's probably the safe comment I usually read about that, right? The Lord is certainly could say they weren't stealing something that wasn't theirs. They certainly earned whatever the Egyptians gave them. They left P. Ramses and everything they built there, right? Wayne?
I think, I don't know what the Lord's mind was, but perhaps it was that payback for all the work done for nothing. But I think maybe they were thinking, we'll use that for cash to swap for food in the future as we're moving on the way back to the promised land. The people maybe thought that, I don't know.
Yeah. And and unfortunately, kind of when's the next time this gold appears? And a golden calf, I believe, right?
Yeah.
So when they melt down all their earrings, they're probably Egyptian earrings. What? Yes?
I think that Pharaoh thought, just let them go. There's like 3-4 million people. Where are they going to go? They're going to go out in the desert, starve, and come back. I think he thought they were going to come back.
Well, that would certainly be rational, right? I mean, he's not.
Yeah.
He's not thinking, boy, they're going to go march through Philistine country and they're going to be better off, or are they going to? How are they going to eat in the wilderness? Right? And he doesn't understand the miracles. They don't even understand.
That's right.
So that is a thing. They can trade some with this money, but it's going to be hard to find people to trade with. But wherever you have money, someone will find you, I suppose. someone will come and sell you something. Margaret?
The willingness of the people to hand over goods and merchandise and tools and stuff. They'd been through 10 disastrous plagues. Go, get rid of you, get this business out of here.
Yeah. Appreciate the reminder that in Genesis 15, God foretold this. I guess we also appreciate that he doesn't take it from Pharaoh, right? He takes it from the people. So I don't know. There's probably something to be said about that. Like Moses is done talking to Pharaoh, but these are. Well, and it didn't just take some of their gold and their clothing, right? Some of the people actually came came with them, right? And that's why you have this conversation about, well, we need to circumcise people, and no foreigners are to take this. That, so there are some people that are going to say they're thinking they're better off with the Israelites in the wilderness. So, what percentage? We don't have really any guess. But some. Other comments or thoughts? So, talked about, wouldn't call it robbing, we'd say plunder the Egyptians. 3, the Lord gave several more regulations regarding the Passover in general. Who would celebrate the Passover?
Circumcised.
All right, men that have been circumcised.
Yeah, because before they could celebrate, they had to be circumcised. Which I
And why
assume
would
is
they be circumcised?
to show their faith.
Yeah. So, these Israelites, these believers in the Lord, and those people that also confessed. I got hung up on it. I don't know if it piqued your attention. What verse is it again? The Passover lamb, no bone will be broken.
46.
Verse 46, thank you. Yeah.
I was thinking, it just hit me now that we read it. The lamb was pointing to Christ, to Jesus. When he was on the cross, not one of his bones was broken.
Yeah.
As they would have, the thieves had, to confirm the death. And that had been prophesied that this is supposed to be again foreshadowing Christ. That would be the whole bone issue.
It may have had something to do with the marrow of the bone. I don't know. Who knows?
I wondered about that too, because sometimes we have dual things here. Like, is this, we had like circumcision on the 8th day. Don't eat these types of animals. I mean, usually the vulture type of animal that spreads disease. Is maybe I could look to Lois or a medical person here. I mean, is there some sort of something that if they broke a bone, they would be in trouble eating? I don't know. I don't worry about that today, but maybe there's something there. Nevertheless, I think we can definitely say that there's great care, and I don't know, there's just great precision. Maybe that's not the greatest word, but there's just, this is a animal that is for a dedicated holy purpose, consecrated purpose. You're gonna pick it out. You're gonna watch over it for months. You're gonna slaughter it in a specific way. It's like when someone says they have a handcrafted hamburger versus a burger that's just thrown on a grill with pretty casually. Maybe that's part of the thought too. This is part of a ritual and a sacred ceremony. So don't break the bones. Wayne, you have a thought?
As far as the lamb, I think it's mainly to point to Jesus, but I don't know of any disease you can get from eating marrow of the bone, or that's a delicacy, in fact, or anything related to that about that. But there are rules later about crustaceans, such as clams and that type of things, where you can get disease from that, and of course they weren't supposed to eat pork. And we all know that people today were concerned you don't want to undercook pork because of trichinosis, even though it's very low nowadays. So there were health restrictions unmentioned that the Lord perhaps was thinking of, but not with the lamb that I ever heard anything, or any sheep.
Yeah. But yeah, so of course we start to see Jesus foreshadowed. We're going to hear it in the Psalms that none of his bones were broken. And so that is It's definitely a symbol of Christ there, a foreshadow of Christ. That is all the way through, right here from Exodus 12. So, question 4, apply. God regulated who could celebrate the Passover. How is this similar to how he regulates who should partake of the Lord's Supper? Talk about a huge tangent we could go on, but we'll just answer the question. Right, God wanted people in this meal that knew what it symbolized and believed in the Lord. And the Lord's Supper is very much the same thing. This is something for people that know what they're receiving, have faith in God. Could you say are part of the Christian community they're eating it with? I suppose maybe not so much in the wilderness, but later, there might be this temptation to, this is what happens in our world, right? How you have this holiday, you celebrate Christ's birth, and then society kind of creeps in, right? It kind of becomes something else. He didn't want that to happen with the Passover specifically, right? He didn't want this to be like a regional feast of lamb, and people lost what was going on with it. And so, of course, there's pros and cons to that, right? I mean, you'd say, well, if they just ate it everywhere, they would have evangelism opportunities. But that's not the point here. It wasn't an evangelism meal. It was their Passover supper. And so we would say the same thing with communion as well. It's not like we're going to be setting up a booth at the fair, and we're going to celebrate the Lord's Supper. Come by our fair booth. It's not an evangelism kind of thing. It's after instruction, and it's worship. Yeah.
We say do this as often as you do this in remembrance of me. If you don't know who Jesus is, that how can you remember and of me? So that's sort of like you have to know who Jesus is and what he means.
Right. Yeah, and you have to define what that is. And the apostles do that, right? And they instruct people. You're sitting against the body and the blood of the Lord, right? You're participating as one family with one loaf, right? So Jesus lets his disciples further flesh that out. So yeah, but it's not like St. Patty's Day, right? Where all of us can just put on green and go to the bar. So nobody blinks an eye. You're Irish today. Yeah. All right. Note in verse 42, God kept vigil over the Israelites by protecting them from his angel of death. The Israelites were told to keep vigil as they celebrated the Passover in honor of God and in thanks for how he had kept vigil over them. What application does this have for how we celebrate Christmas and Easter? Kind of a long way to say, how do we keep vigil? Margaret?
In a way, with our special focus, the Advent services.
So, Advent services, our congregation doesn't have them, but the season of Advent, Lenten services, Christmas Eve service, Good Friday. So these, we call them vigil services. They are preparing our hearts, and just as God watched over the people, he kept vigil over them. We know God. We keep vigil too. We worship the Lord and remember his goodness to us. So He's so. And I think you can. We do that too with our preparations for those days, like maybe you could consider like an Advent by candlelight, or like a family devotions before holy days and things like that. So keep vigil, and so the Lord was watching over them again as they were leaving. Verse 42, I'll just read that again. So because the Lord kept vigil that night to bring them out of Egypt, on that night all the Israelites are to keep vigil to honor the Lord for the generations to come. So there's your, is that your first institution of a vigil service, so to speak? Yeah. Great.
We used to have Advent services. Why did we discontinue them?
Because a wise man at the seminary told us that
Good answer.
you're busy enough during December. If your church doesn't have them, don't start them. So I think they started because of Lent, right? So I think it was a noble thought that you have these weeks before Lent, and the church has generally said that's good, and then it's like, well, if Easter has Lent, why don't we have Advent services midweek? And so really, they were kind of tacked on historically. But yeah, I think with Lent we would talk about how you have a really good divide of separating Jesus' passion on the Wednesdays or Thursdays, and then your other lessons during the week, where Advent you sort of trip over each other a little bit more. Like you could, if you want to do like strictly Christmas type of lessons, you could put them on Sundays. But someone wiser than me said so. That's my answer.
I thought
But truthfully, I think sometimes, and maybe it was a conversation I've had here, they weren't well attended, like Lent services either. So, if the collection plate was full, Dwayne, we probably would still have the services. People would make the pastors do it. But I think attendance too over the years has dwindled on those. But yeah, I mean, what's wrong with having more worship? There's nothing wrong with that. That's the gosh honest truth, as I understand it. Yeah.
There's always a church in the area that probably does. Right now, with sharing with Redeemer, I don't know what we're doing for Advent, but historically, Grace has always had Advent services. So if you want to come to Advent, you can come out to Grace.
Grace, I think St. Matthew's Marathon might still have it too.
Years ago when they did have it, we didn't have all these services like Saturday night and Monday night and stuff like that either.
Yeah.
So
well, we had Sunday night services for many years.
yeah, but
For
we have
the-
like 5 or 6, and they didn't have that years ago.
Point
I mean, at
taken.
Bethlehem, we had a ton of services.
Yeah.
And
It would be, it would be nice to do like a Thursday Advent, but then we have to print two bulletins for 4 weeks in a row and have organists prepare 2 services and
As an organist's wife, I could tell you that's a pain.
so your husband practices? Is that what that's cool.
Oh yeah.
It is a pain, yeah. Yeah.
Naomi, you have a.
Naomi had a hand up.
I forgot.
Okay.
About Advent services?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I was going to tell you, First German in Manitowoc had, I don't know if they still do, Christmas Day first Christmas Day, second Christmas Day, and third Christmas Day services.
Yeah.
So every day for a week?
Just about.
Margaret?
Well, in the Lenten services, Jesus asked his disciples to watch with him, very specific way, while he went to pray. Watch with me, and come back and they were asleep. Can't you watch with me 1 hour? So I can see where they would start the Lenten services as opposed, if you were gonna start services. But what would there be equivalent
Right.
for Advent? I miss the Advent services, that was always a very special thing. But
Yeah, and some of it too is Lent doesn't. Advent can kind of water down the Christmas season. Like you kind of have all your these Christmas texts right before the Christmas season too. Like, so there is kind of a thought like you keep Christmas 1 and 2, the Sundays after Christmas more Christmassy as opposed to Jesus is born. Well, we're done. Christmas shouldn't feel like the 9th inning. It should feel kind of like the 5th inning. Where Advent does kind of bring Christmas forward even longer, and then after Christmas you're still talking about baby Jesus, and so
It leads you up to the, Advent reviews the conception and it reviews the,
and the promises of Jesus is coming.
and
But
and the Mary going to see Sarah, Elizabeth.
Yeah, so I think
So it reviews some of that stuff and before you get to the Caesar Augustus issued a decree,
so culturally we're conditioned that Christmas starts the day after Thanksgiving. That starts the Christmas season, right? But yeah, the church here hasn't figured or changed to that, right? The church here still kind of says,
We do 3 weeks of Advent.
And I think it would be a lot of work for the pastors to do that too. It might,
Oh, right. And it's not all about us, but
yeah.
it's, Chapter 13, let's do it. Consecration of the firstborn, setting out from Egypt. Wayne was nice enough to do the last chapter, 22 verses. Anyone else want to try this guy? Sure, okay.
The Lord said to Moses, consecrate to me every firstborn male. The first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether man or animal. Then Moses said to the people, commemorate this day, the day you came out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, because the Lord brought you out of it with a mighty hand. Eat nothing containing yeast. Today, in the month of Abib, you are leaving. When the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites, the land he swore to your forefathers to give you a land flowing with milk and honey, you are to observe this ceremony in this month. For 7 days eat bread made without yeast, and on the 7th day hold a festival to the Lord. Eat unleavened bread during those 7 days, nothing with yeast in it to be seen among you, nor shall any yeast be seen anywhere within your borders. On that day tell your son, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. This observance will be for you like a sign on your hand and a reminder on your forehead that the law of the Lord is to be on your lips. For the Lord brought you out of Egypt with his mighty hand. You must keep this ordinance at the appointed time, year after year. After the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites and gives it to you as he promised on oath to you and your forefathers, you are to give over to the Lord the first offspring of every womb. All the firstborn males of your livestock belong to the Lord. Redeem with a lamb every firstborn donkey, but if you do not redeem it, break its neck. Redeem every firstborn among your sons. In days to come, when your son asks you, what does this mean? Say to him, with a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed every firstborn in Egypt, both man and animal. This is why I sacrifice to the Lord the first male offspring of every womb and redeem each of my firstborn sons. And it will be like a sign on your hand and the symbol on your forehead that the Lord brought us out of Egypt with his mighty hand. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter, for God said if they face war, they may change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people round by the desert road toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt and armed for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the sons of Israel swear an oath. He had said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up with you from this place. After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people.
All right. It's lessons like that make me wonder if the Israelites had a map, like your spouse does when you're driving through the city and they question every turn you make. Going the right way? Kind of wonder, how well did the Israelites realize they were kind of going into a dead end, right? But yeah, maybe they thought they were going to do a U-turn. We'll go back when we're ready. So anyway, just some thoughts that I had there. We'll talk a little bit more about their wandering. The look first, God did not lead Israel through the Philistine territory. The Philistines were a warring people, and Israel had no experience in battle. The NIV translation of verse 18, armed for battle, seems to contradict this. A better translation would be in an orderly procession, which would fit better with verse 17. So are they in an orderly possession? Are they armed for battle? Can we just say the men probably were in front, regardless? Probably at least safe to say that, right? They knew they weren't, walking through the park. So they were ready. Verse 20, the Israelites journey led to Succoth. No doubt a meeting point. The exact locations of the places mentioned here are not known. So is this like a crossroads? Is this a small community of people? Hard to say. And some of you are probably very familiar with the theories, like where on the Red Sea was the crossing going to be at, and all that fun stuff. Verse 21, how God led Israel is described here. In a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Cloud and fire were the visible representations of the invisible God. So, the angel of death has done his work. He's been called off, and now God leads his people in this spectacular way. So, how do they know where they're supposed to be or where they're supposed to go? Well, the pillar starts moving, I suppose. Moses and everybody follow behind. Your comments, your questions. chapter 13 when I dig into the lesson. Well, what two customs are described in verses 1 to 16? Yes.
The Feast of Unleavened Bread is the one after the Passover, right, in the celebration?
Yeah.
Because that's a week long, because that would then explain why back in chapter 12, Moses spent a lot of time talking about the people taking out the dough that wasn't risen in these troughs and carrying them on their shoulders, and twice he talks about it. So that would have been their bread to celebrate in the next 7 days, I guess, to provide the.
Yeah, so Passover kicks off this festival of unleavened bread. Yeah.
So that's the one for custom, I guess.
Yeah, and I think this comes into play, and I'm thinking back to our Bible studies on Sunday morning in the spring. I think this would coincide with maybe the winter wheat harvest being completed. So yeah, we do have a festival here that's gonna continue on, and the Lord has no problem talking about the future and before they get there too. So yeah, so they have the custom is going to be the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the other thing they're to do.
Dedication of the firstborn.
Yeah, and dedication of their firstborn. And it's going to be people
And
and animals, and even what was it? Interesting enough, verse 13: redeem with a lamb every firstborn donkey. So every firstborn animal and a sacrifice for the people. And I don't know, I think this is kind of a reminder that you were blessed by the Lord with the firstborn. You trust that He's going to provide other animals, other children as well after that. So when Jesus was born, they took Him to the temple to do what was customary, right? Not just circumcision, but the sacrifice, consecration of their firstborn. Yeah, sure.
The thing about redeeming firstborn donkey. Is that, I suppose they had donkeys as means of transportation, or is that another pointing to Jesus riding the donkey into Palm Sunday? The donkey, I don't know what other animals they had as to ride on. I don't think they had horses like Pharaoh would have had. I don't know if they had, but would that have been a means of older people to travel on, and so they saved their donkeys?
It's an interesting comment there. I would say that maybe it's just a comment to the fact that Israelites are not camel people. Isn't that scene in Indiana Jones where him and his buddy are like, go get us some horses, and he came back with camels, and Indiana Jones was all upset. He's like, I like camels, not horses. So I think too, your animal, your beast of burden as an Israelite has been and will be donkeys. Just never culturally caught on, and eventually, of course, they're not going to have camels in the Promised Land as much. So, plus it's a cheaper animal.
Mary and Joseph traveled by
Yeah.
too. That's the picture we have.
It's a humble animal, beast of burden. But they'll also yoke oxen. So I don't know exactly. At some point you maybe hit one of the top animals and you just assume they figured this out. They'll consecrate others as well. Yeah.
The donkey wasn't one of the unclean animals, wasn't it?
Oh, you're asking me if
So it
donkeys were unclean. Well, then no one's going to eat a donkey
No,
unless
they were not acceptable for sacrifices.
they have the split hoof, don't they?
And it says here in the People's Bible that the firstborn of unclean domestic animals such as donkeys were unacceptable for sacrifice, so they had to be redeemed with the lamb, or else had to be killed by breaking their necks.
Oh, okay, nice. Thank you, People's Bible. So, yeah. So an unclean animal would not be sacrificed because you're gonna more than likely eat the animal that's been sacrificed too. But okay, I think what I had read in a note maybe was just the thought that donkeys were very valuable too. So I mean, maybe at some point the thought would be too that this would be a really high conviction sacrifice if we, lost a donkey. But I appreciate the People's Bible on that too. Yeah, you can't sacrifice an unclean animal and then eat it. So, hee-haw, right? 2, in regards to the consecration of the firstborn, why did God consider firstborn men and animals his own? Yeah, Kathleen?
I kind of wondered if this smacked to me of the first fruits. You give the first fruit in sacrifice or in dedication to the Lord, and even Christ himself being the first fruit of the resurrection, first one to rise and show the way. I don't know. When I read that, I think of the first fruits.
Yeah, and I didn't look it up recently, but I mean, do we even make the point that Abel brought from the first fruits of his crop, and Cain? It doesn't say Cain brought the first fruits; it says Cain brought some. So that has been something God has said. Yeah.
This also says that the firstborn would remind them that the firstborn was saved. All the other firstborn were killed, but their firstborn were saved. So that would remind them of the Exodus when the firstborn were saved, their firstborn were saved. And also that they're set apart.
Right. So God did spare the firstborn, and then that's very, very parallel, right? They continue to celebrate. God's passing over. Yeah. So I think both of those are very strong thoughts and reasons. So, my note here said he had a right to demand whatever he wanted from his people as their act of service for his deliverance. He chose firstborn sons, which they could buy back from God. Yeah. So. Question 3, note verses 8 to 10 and 14 to 16. What did keeping these customs give Israel parents a chance to do? Yeah, they could. Dad, why are we doing this? So, very teachable moment. I suppose the Lord did not give the kids Sunday school teachers or too many books from NPH to read to their children. But they could do this, right? They could talk about the Lord's deliverance and be reminded again and again. Tabernacle's going to help out, right? soon enough. From ancient times, apply. From ancient times, the Christian church has used symbolism, stained glass windows, pageantry, church architecture, and liturgies. All have served to remind Christians of the truths of the faith. What insights do we get from verses 8 to 10 and 14 to 16 on how to use rituals in a beneficial way?
Pageantry is Advent,
How can you
when
use
the kids sing and stuff that, that's, cause you were like pageantry.
Well, pageantry,
We
I
do
mean,
have some pageantry
we
in
would
the
we define
church
what
today.
pageantry as like reenactment,
Yeah.
right?
Well, we don't have it as,
Ashes on
much.
Ash Wednesday is, I would call that pageantry.
we don't have as much as they used to.
I guess. Yes, Naomi.
It's also a model for the children that they see how much you regard what God has done. Example is what I meant, not model. Example.
You know, the Lord created us to be not just thinking people, but emotional and physical, right? I mean, he does want the senses to be involved in worship and in learning. And stained glass windows stimulate the eyes. You know, ashes on your forehead, you know, touch and feel, and these, you know, palms on Palm Sunday, all those sorts of things. They work to bring us back into those teachable moments and connect us to our past, and that's what God really wanted this meal to do, right? Connect them to their deliverance and God's providence. You know? So it's not a ritual for ritual's sake, and of course you don't want to go overboard. You don't want the ritual to replace the meaning, and that's kind of, you know, the historical danger with Luther and the Reformation, and, you know, a lot of people today that, no, this is what we do on these holy days, but we don't believe or understand the gospel as we should. So, Wayne, question or comment?
The Lord has given us all these blessings, music and etc. And He wants us to praise Him body and with all our body and soul. So He says, not just any old song, but how about a new song? And how about a loud song? I don't want a boring old song where you're maybe going to sleep all the time. They're like droning on out of just going through the motions. We have been given this grace unlimited in Christ so that we can express that in all the ways, with our hearing, with our seeing, with our tasting at the festivals, with our smelling of the incense.
Yeah. So often quoted as the psalmist says, you know, sing to the Lord a new song. That's not saying we need to get a new organ or, you know, start incorporating jazz music into our worship. Sometimes people tell you that. They're like, new song means contemporary worship. But new song as in, yeah, there's nothing wrong with gospel motivating our worship, right? It's not, we have the joy of Jesus now, and that leads us in many ways. I don't know, Jesus always tells us to have harps and cymbals, and we don't do that in church enough. So that's my contemporary worship point. Jesus says cymbals. What on earth is cymbals? Dwayne, did we have cymbals? Probably not.
At Jacob's church, they sing with, Jacob plays guitar, they sing with guitar, they had drums. They got it all.
Right. But it's really not the point, right? We don't go to Africa and say, hey, where's your harps, you Africans? But yeah,
Where's your pipe organs?
yeah. Jesus never had a pipe organ. He should have though. Where was I going with? Oh, one last thought, and I teased it earlier. So they get to the Red Sea, and they're going to cross it. I cannot for the life of me, and I will never figure out until I get to heaven how many days it took them to get there. I think Josephus or one of those guys talk about like it was a 3-day journey to the Red Sea, and then you can find people talk about as many as like 20 days. Maybe you can do that as homework and get back to me, but I think you'll find some opinions on both sides of the fence. At any rate, I think it's safe to say at about 3 days, Pharaoh realized the Israelites told me they were going to worship for like 3 days or a week, and they never came back. And so I guess I'm maybe in the camp at the moment of saying it could be 2 or 3 weeks. They leave. Pharaoh is licking his wounds. The Israelites realize we're not going to go up into the Philistine area. They go to Succoth. You have some distance here. You have 600,000 men plus their families and all their cattle. I know in the movies and in our children's lessons we probably think they
They're
leave
not moving
Egypt
fast.
and they go straight there.
I think it was slow.
But it might have been a little bit slower. Yeah. That's okay. Because it sounds like even so in verse 18 the Israelites went up out of Egypt armed for battle. I'm sorry. I'm looking for Pharaoh. Well, again, we just don't know how long it takes. But I'm sure Pharaoh didn't take too long to get there when he figured it out. So, but that's for next time. That's chapter 14. Pharaoh's heart's going to be hardened again by God, and he's going to ride out there to fight and die. So, look forward to that. Any last comments or questions? All right. Praise God.
Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above the heavenly hosts. Praise